everyone, Chris here, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about the books I read between June 22nd and June 28th. First up, I read A Conjuring of Light by V. Schwab, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is the third book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. In this trilogy, we live in a world where there are 4 Londons: Red London, White London, Black London, and Grey London. There used to be tons of travel between the Londons, but in present day they are closed off from one another, and only a select few can travel between the Londons. One of these people is Cal, and he has official duties that require him to travel between the Londons. He also uses these opportunities to smuggle goods back and forth between the Londons, even though that isn't allowed. This ends up leading him in danger where he meets Delilah. First she robs him, then she saves him, then she demands that Cal bring her back to his London with him. Then things end up going pear-shaped, and the two of them have to work together to save all of the Londons. So I didn't end up enjoying the series as much as I thought I would based on the premise and the first book. This book was a bit slow for me at times, and I felt like in some ways we were plodding along. Especially considering by this point you knew that certain things were going to happen, so you were just kind of waiting for those things to happen, and it seemed like there were certain events that had to happen before the big event could happen, and they were just kind of thrown in there to prolong the inevitable. I still ended up enjoying this book and this series, and I'm glad I read it, but I can't see it being something that I reread in the future because I think one time was enough for me. So far with V. Schwab's writing, I've read this series and I've read Addie LaRue, and in both of those, like this series and Addie LaRue, I found there's certain characters I get really attached to, and then others I just don't care about, and because the other characters are so important to the story that if I don't care about those characters, I end up not enjoying when I have to hear tons about them, and it kind of takes me out of the story a little bit. So I think I will continue to check out more from V. Schwab in the future, but I think I will go into them with lower expectations, knowing that I tend to only like some of her characters. Next up, I read Saga Volume 9 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. In this series, we're following a world and a moon who are at war, and they've dragged basically every sentient world into this war with them. And our main characters are Alana and Marco, and they are on opposite sides of the war, and they end up having a kid. And this is considered such a no-no that there are tons of people on their trail trying to capture and or kill them and their child. So this is the last volume that's been released of the series. I am still absolutely loving it, and I knew I had heard people say that they wish they weren't caught up with this series because there is something that happens in this volume that makes them so upset that they don't have the next volume, and I totally get it now. I totally get it. I could not believe that the thing that happened in this book happened, and I need volume 10 like right now because I need to know what happens next. So yeah, I'm still loving this series, even if I'm annoyed that I don't have any more volumes to check out, and whenever volume 10 comes out, I will definitely be picking it up. Next up, I read Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. In this book, we're following 4 12-year-old paper girls who are out delivering papers on the morning of Halloween in 1988, and some weird things go down while they're out, and their lives are really, really turned upside down. So this is weird. I did not like this as much as Saga, and I thought that I might like this more than I did because Saga had surprised me, and this is very, very weird. This is trippy. I also only found one of the 4 girls likable. I wasn't exactly a huge fan of the other 3. I don't know that I want to continue on with this series. If you've read Paper Girls, let me know if you think I should keep reading these in the comment section below, because I'm very curious to know if it's worth continuing to pick these up, and if we learn more about the girls that makes you more attached to them as you go along. But as it stands right now, I'm really unsure as to whether I'm going to continue reading this series. Next up, I read How to Walk Away by Catherine Center, and I gave this book 5 stars. In this book, we're following Margaret, who seems to have everything she could have ever wanted in life. A great boyfriend, a dream job, with the life she always imagined for herself seemingly right around the corner. And then one disastrous moment happens and threatens to take everything she's worked so hard for away from her. She ends up waking up in the hospital and everything has changed, and she has to try to figure out how to cope with everything that's happened and what this new life that she is being set up to live is going to look like, because it is not the life that she dreamed of when she was younger. I really, really enjoyed this book. I loved getting to see Margaret struggle with this new reality she found herself in, and how it didn't just affect her, it affected all of the people in her life. And I loved getting to see her relationship with her sister and how that played out throughout the story, because she hasn't really had contact with her sister in the last 3 years, and this accident that lands her in the hospital brings her sister back in her life, and she realizes there's more to that story than she knew about. And it is just interesting to see the family dynamics and how her parents and her sister handle this accident, how the boyfriend handles the accident, and how not only Margaret herself handles the accident, but how each of the people in her life's reaction to it affects the way she handles things. And I love the romance story that is part of this novel, and I really love seeing that relationship play out. I also listened to the audiobook for this, and there is a story at the end of the audiobook that answers a question I had from the beginning of the book. So I absolutely love that. It's like a mini little bonus. It's not in the physical book, but I love that we got that kind of little Easter egg. And if you've read other Catherine Center books before you read this one, then you might know what the Easter egg is. You might have the same reaction, because this isn't the first Catherine Center book I've read. And I love that little Easter egg that was in this book, and I definitely plan to read more from Catherine Center in the future. Next up, I read Shelly Struggles to Shine and Tomoko Takes the Lead by Kit Rosewater, and I gave both of these books 5 stars. These are the second and the third books in the Derby Daredevil series. In the first book, we're following Kenzie and her friend Shelly, who absolutely love roller derby, and they find out that a junior roller derby league is being set up in their town, and are super excited to be able to participate, until they realize they have to have a team of 5 and there's only 2 of them. So they set out to find 3 other people to join their roller derby team. In Shelly Struggles to Shine, we're focused on Shelly this time, and she is trying to figure out what her special role is within the team, and is really struggling with the self-esteem of feeling like each of the other girls has something special that they bring to the team, and Shelly really doesn't. And I liked getting to see Shelly struggle with trying to figure out what makes her stand out and what her important contribution is to the team, and how that affects her and her relationship with the girls. And in Tomoko Takes the Lead, we're following Tomoko's point of view, and basically the girls are headed to a summer camp for 2 weeks, and Tomoko isn't really thrilled because she's a bit shy and introverted and isn't hugely into meeting new people. But her uncle convinces her that it's going to be all right, because she and her uncle go camping all the time. So she figures she'll be able to show off her camping expertise, since she knows a lot about camping. Unfortunately, when she gets there, she finds out that they're not going to be in the wilderness for 2 weeks. They're basically in the city center. And of course, she's packed for 2 weeks in the wilderness, and it draws her some unwanted attention from some of the other roller derby teams that are attending the summer camp. During their visit, Tomoko and her team slip out to a local basketball court that's not far away from the venue where they're staying. But once they get there, they realize they can't figure out how to get back, and Tomoko wonders if she might be able to use the wilderness skills that she learned while camping with her uncle to find their way back. I really enjoyed getting to see Tomoko's point of view and seeing how she handles things, and how being at this camp is hard for her because her personality is so different from those of her friends. I liked getting to see her struggle with that and deal with that, and her friends not necessarily noticing because Tomoko doesn't want to make a big deal about it, so she doesn't really speak up. And I enjoy getting to see them lost in the city trying to figure out how to get back to the summer camp before they're missed. I really enjoy this series, and there's a lot of diversity in the series. So if you haven't checked out the Derby Daredevil series, then I highly recommend that you do, because they're fun middle grade stories that talk about teamwork, and like I said, have a lot of diversity in each of them. And I really enjoy this series, and am assuming that there's going to be at least 5 books, and we're going to get 2 more books where we get to see the other 2 girls' points of view. Next up, I read All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, and I gave this book 5 stars. So this is a memoir looking at George M. Johnson's life growing up as a queer black boy. I listened to this on audiobook, and I believe it's read by George M. Johnson, and I think that really adds to the story. It was quite interesting to listen to him tell the story of his life and talk about how growing up as a queer black kid was for him and how he figured himself out and figured out his place in the world. I really love autobiographies or biographies, or in this case, memoirs. I love when people tell their story, and this was no different. I really enjoyed this book. I really just found this to be an enjoyable read, and I'm really glad that I picked it up. Next up, I read The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss, and I gave this book 4.25 stars. So this is the second book in the Kingkiller Chronicles, and in this series, we're following Quoth, who is telling the story of his life, and he is basically saying it'll take 3 days to tell his story, and the first book is day 1 of him telling his story, the second book is day 2 of him telling his story, and the third book is going to be day 3 of him telling his story. And Quoth is like the most famous wizard in the world, so he's telling the story of how he became this legend. And I really enjoyed getting to see more of Quoth's journey in this book. It is 1,000 pages, so it is a very long book, and if you're looking for fast pace, this series is not for you. It is very slow paced, but also very interesting. Like I said in the previous book, I love autobiographies and biographies and memoirs and learning about people that way. So this is essentially him telling his autobiography to somebody and having them write it down for him. So I think it is absolutely fascinating. And I am very, very, very curious to see how he ends up being the barkeep that he is when we meet him in book 1, because he's not Quoth anymore. He has kind of shed his entire past, and I'm very curious as to the hows and whys. And I know that I may be waiting a while, because I believe it's been at least 10 years since the second book was released, and we're still waiting on the third. So I know I have a ways to go before I'm going to be satisfied, but whenever that third book comes out, I will definitely be reading it, because I want to know the end of Quoth's story. Next up, I read Kingsbane by Claire Legrand, and I gave this book 4.25 stars. This is the second book in the Imperium trilogy. In this trilogy, we follow 2 girls, Riel and Eliana, and they live 1,000 years apart, and there's kind of like a prophecy that says there's going to be a Sun Queen who's going to save everybody, and a Blood Queen who is set to doom everybody. And you'll know that these queens have arrived because there are magical powers that the people have, and usually they can only wield one of them, but the Sun Queen and the Blood Queen will be able to wield all of them. And in the first book, we find out that Riel has the ability to wield all 7 of these powers, and she has to prove that she is the Sun Queen and not the Blood Queen. And then we're in Eliana's time period 1,000 years later, where none of these powers exist anymore due to events in the past, and we're seeing Eliana in her world where there's no magic powers. And one night her mother disappears, and she ends up having to team up with people that she never would have considered teaming up with before to find out what happens to her mother, and she learns a lot of shocking things along the way, including how she is connected to Riel. So this book is the continuation of that series, and let me just say, I cannot wait to read book 3, because this ended in a, oh my god, did that just happen sort of way. So I'm really glad the third book is out so that I can pick that up, which I plan to do in the relatively near future. I'm still really enjoying this series and seeing Riel and Eliana's journey and how their stories are connected. I am really curious to know how Riel ends up being the person that Eliana knows of, and I'm really curious to see if we find out where the magic went and why it disappeared, like why Eliana's world no longer has magic. I cannot wait to pick up book 3 and finish out this trilogy and see how Claire Legrand wraps things up. Next up, I read One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, and I gave this book 4 stars. In this book, we're following a girl named August who has just moved to New York City. She then meets a girl named Jane on the train and quickly develops a crush on her. She looks forward to running into Jane on this train until she realizes that every single time she steps foot on the train, Jane is there. She soon finds out that this is because Jane is from the 1970s and somehow has become stuck in August's time and trapped on this train. August then has to figure out how to get Jane unstuck by using skills from her past that she was hoping to never have to use. while also trying to protect her heart, because the more time she spends with Jane, the more she gets into Jane. So I really enjoyed this book. I really liked August as a character, and I liked how we got to see her develop, and she's basically moved to New York City and she's had these roommates, and I like seeing her relationship with her roommates develop and how her relationship with Jane develops, despite the fact that Jane is stuck in time and isn't really sure how she got there or what's going on. I like getting to see their relationship develop and watching August realize that she's really into Jane, but she knows the right thing to do is get Jane unstuck. But if she gets Jane unstuck, she's likely going to lose Jane because Jane will no longer be on the train. And Jane is from the 1970s. So I really did like this little bit of like time travel-y, sci-fi twist on a romance novel. There are also a few things in here that were interesting little twists that I really, really liked. The reason this didn't get the full 5 stars for me is because I wasn't a huge fan of how the book wrapped up. There were a couple of things that happened at the end that I wished had gone a different way, but I still really enjoyed the book and I'm glad I read it. If it sounds interesting to you, I think you should check it out, because maybe the twists and the end of the book won't bother you as much as they did me. Next up, I read Thereby Hangs a Tale by Spencer Quinn, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This is the second book in the Chet and Bernie series, and in this series we follow Chet, who is a literal dog. It is completely told from his point of view, and he behaves and thinks and acts just like you would expect a dog to. His human Bernie is a PI, and we get to see Chet help Bernie out on his cases, even though Chet doesn't always understand what Bernie is saying or doing, and vice versa. In this book, they are investigating threats to a prized show dog, which Bernie doesn't quite understand why somebody would threaten a show dog, but when the show dog and the owner go missing, Bernie dives into the case with both feet, and Chet has no choice but to tag along and help Bernie figure things out. I listened to the audiobook of this, and I really like the audiobook. I think the audiobooks are far better than the physical books, because with the books being told from the point of view of the dog, it can sometimes be a bit jarring to be in his head, and I think that affects the flow, at least for me, because I read the first book physically. And I like that the audiobook narrator is fixing that flow problem that I had with the first book. So I think I will definitely be continuing on with the series, because I really love seeing Chet's antics and seeing how he manages to piece things together, and how he and Bernie both use their skills to figure things out and then have to try to figure out a way to communicate that information to each other, even though Bernie doesn't always see Chet as the asset that he is. Because again, Chet's a dog, so it doesn't occur to him necessarily to share every bit of information with Chet. And on top of that, Chet has the attention span of a dog, so sometimes he misses stuff. So I think that's interesting, trying to figure out the mystery alongside Chet when you're not getting all of the information that Bernie has either, but you have information that Bernie doesn't have. And I think that adds a very interesting dynamic on this series. So I will definitely continue to check out more books in this series. And lastly, I read Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee, and I gave this book 4 stars. So in this book, we're living in a world where superheroes and supervillains exist, and we're following Jessica. And she is the daughter of 2 superheroes. She did not seem to inherit any of her parents' superpowers, and so she is trying to figure out what she wants to do in life, since superhero is apparently off the table. It doesn't help that her sister has superpowers that go beyond what her parents are able to do, and that her younger brother is like super intelligent, so the fact that he doesn't have superpowers doesn't seem to bother him, as both her older sister and her younger brother seem to have life figured out. She ends up deciding to apply for an internship, and she gets it. Unfortunately, she finds out that this internship requires her to work under the supervillains that are her parents' nemesis. On the bright side, though, she's working with her crush, Abby. And she really enjoys spending time with another intern who is quite mysterious and only goes by the letter M. While she is working there, she ends up discovering a plot that is bigger than she could ever have imagined, and she has to try to figure out what to do with that information and who exactly she can trust to share this information with. So I really enjoyed this book. I liked the superhero aspect of it. I really love like superhero and supervillains, and I think this was done really well. I liked getting to see Jessica deal with the fact that she was working for essentially the supervillains that her parents are constantly battling with, but at the same time she really liked working there and was seeing kind of a different side to them. It was interesting to see her getting to work with her crush and have to try to figure out how to deal with that in an appropriate manner, because she's really never talked to her crush before, so like she doesn't want to come off as a basically bumbling idiot. It is interesting to see her relationship with her fellow intern M develop too, and how M helps her with her crush. I really liked the overarching story and the kind of plot that Jessica uncovers while she's working at this internship, and I definitely plan to continue on with the series to see what happens next to Jessica and everybody else we meet in this book. So these are some of the books I've read recently. Have you read any of these books? If so, let me know what you thought of them in the comments section below. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me a pirate flag emoji, like this video, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!